Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well today, and welcome back for the paranormal side. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch displayed under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description below. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time, and you have waited to take that walk on the paranormal side. So let's get into it, shall we? On tonight's paranormal side, we get to take a look at what law enforcement has to deal with. I'm a sheriff's deputy in a fairly busy county. Along with this job comes the unfortunate familiarity with what a decomposing human body smells like. To me, it's very similar to an animal carcass, but with a much sweeter odor. Not sweet in the sense that I enjoy it, hell no. That smell normally means a bad night for me and another gruesome memory to add to my catalog of things I would rather forget. With that out of the way, I'll get to what happened. Last night I was patrolling a geographically isolated area of the county, which is very large and sparsely populated. Having completed the hour-long trek to the northwestern county line, I began driving through the mountains back toward civilization. About 25 miles from town, or the closest semblance thereof, I hit a straight stretch of highway through a wide-open valley. Since the weather was nice, I had my windows rolled down as I passed the entrance of an old logging road. That familiar, sweet smell of rot suddenly filled my car. Not just a whiff, a cloud of it filled the cab, as if there was a week-old human corpse sitting in the front seat next to me. It was all too familiar, but this time there was something else that I could not place. It lingered for a few moments, then went away just as quickly as it had entered. Realizing what I had just smelled, my heart sank and I pulled to the side of the road. I told myself it was just a dead animal in the ditch, and that my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned my car around and drove slowly back toward the logging road. The closer I got to it, the smell became stronger, and I grew more certain that I was about to find a body. Holding on to a shred of hope that I was wrong, I parked my unit on the side of the highway, just before the dirt road. I radioed to dispatch, told them my location, and that I would be out of my unit for a moment. I didn't say why to avoid the awkward disregard of a possible body on the side of the road. I shined my flashlight in the ditch and onto the encroaching briars and weeds as I walked closer to where I believed the source of the smell was coming from. Once I was a few yards away from the dirt road, I saw the opening to a concrete culvert going under the highway. At this point, the smell was nearly as strong as it was when I first passed. The opening of the culvert was about 3 feet in diameter, just large enough to hide a body inside. I cursed and held my breath as I leaned over and shined my light inside. An empty tunnel stretching the width of the highway. Somewhat relieved, I stood and looked around. It smelled as if I was standing on top of whatever was emitting the odor. I searched around the brush for a moment, but found nothing. Thinking the origin may be on the opposite side of the highway, I crossed to the other ditch to continue searching. As I walked away from the other side of the road, the smell grew faint. I stopped at the opposite end of the culvert and peeked inside just to double check. The odor was nearly gone at this point. I stood up and checked my surroundings when I heard a crack in the brush behind me, and the smell engulfed me and was even stronger than before. Thinking for a moment that the wind must have shifted, I froze when I realized the air was dead still. Whether it was fear or something else, a shiver went down my spine. In the distance, I saw headlights coming down the highway. As the car came near, the odor seemed to move away further into the brush towards where I heard the crack. The car stopped, the passenger rolled down the window and asked if I was all right. I lied and told him I was. I thanked him for checking and walked briskly to my car as they drove away. I got the hell away from there. Once I was able to get cell service, I called my friend who was patrolling the opposite side of the county. I explained what happened, trying to not let on that I was spooked. Once I was done, he paused for a moment, then asked about the unusual hint of something which accompanied the smell. He asked if it was sulfur, and I put two and two together. It was sulfur that I smelled. I asked if he thought I had found a demon in the middle of nowhere, to which he responded with a concerned yes. A little background on this guy: he is the son of a missionary and has been around the world. He has seen, rather smelled this before, and told me that it is a very concerning experience. This spooked me even more because his responses were very out of character for him. There's always the chance of a very scientific explanation, and I hope that one is out there that could explain this away. Now, a few experiences I had working at an old jail at the start of my career. At my first department, you had to be vetted through the jail in order to become a patrol deputy. I started in the jail when I was 20 and served a little over a year as a jailer before being transferred to the patrol division and sent to the academy. The jail in question was built in the 60s or 70s and was falling apart when I started working there. I can only imagine the conditions now. It was a small jail with 3 housing blocks and held a max capacity of roughly 60 inmates. My first few weeks I was there, I was put with a senior jailer so he could show me the ropes. The standards for working in a detention facility at the time were fairly lax, so anyone listening to this who was working or currently works in a detention, there will be a few WTF moments in this when it comes to how we did things. Before I started the night shift portion of my training, I had several employees tell me the story of a jailer who was attacked by something in the booth, the control room where we were stationed. The story was that the jailer was working on paperwork late at night after all of the inmates were locked down when he kept feeling something brush on his neck. After he felt it for a few times, he turned around and saw a dark, humanoid figure perched on the shelf behind him. As he stood, the figure supposedly jumped at him, causing the jailer to run down the steps, out the door of the booth, then out of the corridor to the booking room. The dispatcher, who was one room over at her station, saw him, then supposedly called an ambulance because he was unable to speak. The whole incident was allegedly caught on camera, but nobody knew where the footage was. I didn't believe the story one bit and brushed it off as a trick they play on the rookies. Once my training was completed, I was placed on night shift by myself. After several weeks of working on my own, I became comfortable being the only one on duty in the jail. I was even to the point where I would play checkers or cards with inmates if they were awake after lockdown. Once everyone was asleep in their cells, I had done my watch tours. I would go to the booth, shut the heavy metal door, and turn on an old TV we had. I was going to college part-time during the day at the time, so if it had been a slow night and no one had caused any problems, I would set an alarm on my phone for the next hour, take a nap. Surprisingly accepted behavior in that jail as long as you did your hourly checks. One night I did my checks, set the alarm for 2 in the morning, checked the control panel to make sure all the doors were secured and locked, dozed off as I had done so many times before. This time, I awoke after what felt like 30 minutes to an inmate worker who had stayed up late to finish his laundry, pounding on the plexiglass window to the booth door. Startled, I jumped up, unlocked the door with my key, and asked what had happened. The trustee told me that he had heard screaming in one of the blocks. I ran to each cell block and was alarmed to find every door had been unlocked. I shined my light in each cell and confirmed everyone was asleep and where they were supposed to be, and quietly locked the doors. When I found that everyone was alive and well, I returned to the booth to find out what had happened. A Upon looking at the control panel, every door in the cell blocks had been unlocked manually. This was obviously a strange experience, but as I said, it was an old jail and the control panel had seen better days. I chalked it up as an electrical malfunction and the scream the trustee had heard as an overactive imagination. Morning came and all of the inmates emerged from their cells to get breakfast. None of them appeared to have been injured or complained of anything happening in the night. The next few months go by relatively well with nothing worthy of mentioning. One morning at around 5 in the morning, my trustee was sitting on the steps of the booth, keeping me company as we drank our coffee and were prepping for morning med call. As I was finishing my paperwork, I caught a glimpse of someone walking around in one of the cell blocks through the booth window. Annoyed at the thought someone had managed to get out of their cell, I looked at the control panel to find that every door was still locked and secured. I looked back through the window and saw a short, brown-haired man with a short brown beard wearing a orange inmate uniform, slowly walking around the block with his head down. He made the second lap and walked behind a pillar, then did not appear on the other side. I popped the block door from the control panel, exited the booth, and stormed into the block, ready to chew this guy out. When I entered, there was no one there. I walked around the block, shined my light in every cell, and checked every door, checked in the showers, under every table. Every door was secure, and no one was out of their cell. I looked at my trustee, and I could tell he was just as confused as I was. He told me that he saw the guy as well. At breakfast, I looked at each inmate as they walked up to see if the one we had seen in the cell block was among them. Nobody came close to matching that description. That morning, I brought it up to one of the dispatchers who had worked there for 20 years. I described to her the man I saw without a word. She pulled out the calendar and pointed to the date and said, "Yup, that's him." Surely she saw the look of confusion on my face because she laughed and told me what she meant. She said the description of the man I saw matched that of a man who had hung himself in the cell block several years back on that day. She said that he was a repeat customer, as we like to call repeat offenders, and was always hired as a trustee due to his work ethic and good behavior. She said the last time he was brought in, he was a different man, fighting with the jailers and other inmates, talking out of his head and acting absolutely insane. She went on to say that one night, the man took a sheet, wrapped one end around the door of the food slot and the other end around his neck, leaned forward, causing him to asphyxiate and die. The dispatcher claimed the spirit of the man was the one haunting the jail, and the one who had attacked the jailer several years back. I began to believe in the haunting after that. As time passed, I experienced several odd occurrences, including office chairs spinning on their own, catching a glimpse of someone looking through the booth window when no one was out, and shadows moving across the walls. Inmates would sometimes report seeing someone in the orange walking past their cells in the middle of the night, and a select unfortunate few said they awoke to a third inmate in their two-man cell watching them as they slept. I later met and befriended the guy who had been attacked by the entity. Shortly after the incident, he quit the jail and went to work for another police department in the county. He refused to talk about the incident, but would say that it was not a joke. When we attempted to poke fun at him about the incident, he would become visibly upset and would walk away. Now, everything in this account could be explained away by electrical malfunctions, sleep deprivation, and a number of other contributing factors. That being said, there are some things that cannot be explained so easily. Today's second experience on the paranormal side. A little bit of backstory. My dad served in the Royal Military Police and left the Army 4 years ago after 30 years of service. My father has always been a very serious man, worked very hard, and had little humor. He is a very dry man. He has traveled the world with his work and experienced all manner of life. He is the last person to believe in the paranormal. Just over 10 years ago, he was posted in Germany, the last of the British troops before all the bases were closed. He had moved into a large house. This house is where Hermann Göring, head of the German Luftwaffe, lived. My father lived there with 3 other high-ranking officers from different regiments, all of which mostly kept to themselves. After 4 months, he happened to have the weekend home alone. In the evening, he was sitting downstairs watching television when he heard footsteps coming down the stairs and into the hallway. He thought nothing of it until the 4th time he had heard someone come down the stairs. He assumed one of his housemates had returned from leave early. He had gone to look, but there was nothing there, and after checking the rest of the house, he went to bed. The following 2 nights, the same thing happened, but my father put the noise down to it being a very old house with creaky floors. Monday morning, he reported the noise along with a draft in the bathroom and a leaky tap to the site management office. His housemates had returned and he had forgotten all about it. A couple of weeks later, he happened to mention the noises he had heard to an old German cleaner. She said in the most matter-of-fact way, "That's Cedric." It turns out Cedric was a Polish prisoner of war, and he used to work in the house. Cedric was sadly beaten to death in the house, and is believed his spirit remains in that house ever since. The cleaner told my father that Cedric walks the stairs every evening and makes occasional noises or gusts of wind during the day. My father told us occasionally about the noises. That could have been Cedric, but none of us believed him. He learnt the ways of Cedric, but there was never any flair or imagination to his stories. Just simply, there's a ghost that wanders around my home. 6 months later, I went to Germany for a work experience placement near where my father was based. He picked me up from the airport and took me to the house where he lived. I stayed the night. There was no mention or sign of the so-called Cedric. In the morning, I was going in for a shower when my dad said, "Don't worry about the wind, it's just Cedric, but he means you no harm." I thought he was winding me up, but I still put a towel under the door to avoid drafts. I had just about finished my shower, about to tell my dad his made-up ghost doesn't exist, when a breeze or gust of wind, whatever it was, blew right through me. It was like nothing I had ever experienced or known since then. It left me cold for the rest of the day. I grabbed my towel and raced out into the bedroom. I got changed, packed my bags, and walked out of that house. I believe it to be the only paranormal thing I have experienced. Thinking back, I can see how that could have been a draft or my dad winding me up. I don't know what it was, but I do know there is definitely a presence in that old house. Today's final law enforcement experience on the paranormal side. I'm a prison officer. We start our nights at approximately 8 p.m. and we are locked in until the following morning at 6 a.m. It is essentially a skeleton crew and several hundred prisoners secured behind their doors. This week has been the most activity that I've ever experienced, and a lot of my colleagues who worked had spooky happenings as well. I'm not really a believer per se, however, a lot of spooky, unexplainable stuff has happened at night, and I have no choice but to begin to believe when it's all added up together. I'll start off with some personal backstory and my experiences, and then this week's activity. At night, we usually patrol 2 linked wings, as there is no need to have staff patrolling each wing when the prisoners are asleep. There is a wing that I believe is haunted. On the 3rd landing, when cutting in between the 2 wings, there's a sudden feeling of being watched by something from the corner. It freaks me out so much. I refuse to cut through there now, as I feel cold and watched. I go the longer way around to access that particular landing, if I have to answer a cell bell. It's the same on the 1st landing, on that same wing. As soon as you come down the stairs and turn to carry on the patrol, there's another horrible, oppressive feeling of being followed that gives me the heebie-jeebies. I've had emergency cell bells used by prisoners to alert staff of an emergency go off on cells that are not occupied, Random doors slam when all the doors apart from the toilet, staff room, and office doors are locked for obvious reasons. And thought I've seen movement on the CCTV cameras when I am alone. I've also heard things, however, anyone who has either been in the prison or worked in one will know they are noisy even at night. I have never said anything about this to my colleagues because being a prison officer, dealing with hardened criminals, and being spooked by nothing is a surefire way to get mocked and picked on. Fast forward to this week. Luckily, I wasn't in the wing and was a member of staff that walks around supporting patrolling staff. I spooked a patrol on random wing as they didn't hear me. And I made a joke about whether they thought I was a ghost. We got talking about ghosts and stuff, and naturally the subject of this wing came up. My face must have said it all because they said, "Don't tell me. The threes as you cut through, and the ones as you come off the stairs." This is spooky that someone else has felt that same, but also a little bit relieving that I'm not the only one who feels it. I carried on with my rounds and chatted to people and got talking about my good jump scare in our chat. Turns out a lot of people who work in the prison believe in ghosts after working night shifts. One of the patrols told me that they almost called me to sit with them as they heard a loud bang as though a cell door had slammed shut. They went and investigated and nothing. They just sat back down and it went again. This obviously spooked them. We began talking about how it's weird that ghosts have been mentioned and that it happens. He then had his own story about the wing I think is haunted, where one of the metal security gates slammed shut behind him on the threes landing as he was cutting through one night. Now, having worked on this wing, that gate doesn't move on its own and it's heavy, let alone slam behind anyone on its own accord. We have a laugh about being blokes and scared of shadows, and I crack on with seeing the next person. To access them, I have to go through a wooden door and a metal gate. It's pitch black, and I don't have my torch, so I open the wooden door, then the metal gate, step in, and look for a light switch so I can see the lock, the door, and gate behind me. As I'm doing this, the wooden door slams shut directly behind me with a huge force. I jumped. It wasn't a windy night, and we were indoors, so no breeze. Let me tell you, I have never shut some doors and gates so fast in my life, so I noped out of there. I spent my rounds talking about ghosts and seeing what everyone's stories are, and there are some interesting ones, but everyone I speak to talks about this haunted wing in either the threes, where I feel like I'm being watched, or the ones, as they come off the stairs, are always mentioned. By this point, I had spoken to 6 staff, and all of them have said the same thing. That's too much of a coincidence for me. I'll finally go on to the haunting wing, and I'm talking to a patrol who has all the lights on for what I can now only assume obvious, as they felt it as well, and I swear I see someone moving. On the cameras, on the ones, walking toward the office just before they go out of camera. Nothing there, and nothing on playback. Alright guys, I wanted today's paranormal side to be longer, and I actually had some more pizzazz when I got prepared to record. Right as I was getting ready to record, I received a call from my landlord, who I have rented from for 6 years and become very good friends with him. He was my landlord, my dentist, taught me a little bit about cameras because, on top of being a dentist, he always furthered his education with things, and just one of the nicest guys I had ever met in my life. And I knew he was sick, and I knew he was very sick because the office below me has been closed for quite some time now, coming up on a couple months. But today's call, he let me know that he was going into hospice, and it's hard. So sorry for the lack of pizzazz in today's upload. But with that being said, send out your prayers, please. He's one of the nicest people you could ever meet. I mean, literally, the man did no harm to anybody. He did more good than a lot of people I know. Doubled, tripled. With that, please be kind to each other, and may the Great Spirit watch over all of us. May He guide us on this thing we call life. Till tomorrow, my friends.